Hello, 3%. I'm Ellen McGirt, Senior Editor at 4Gen, creator of the Race Ahead newsletter. It is great to be with you virtually. Now, let's dig in. 2020 has given new meaning to the term work-life balance. It's also brought the concept of inclusivity to the forefront to an extreme degree. From workers dealing with physical and mental disabilities while in quarantine, to adults with kids at home trying to manage childcare while working, to Black and Brown colleagues whose families and communities have suffered disproportionately from the pandemic. This virtual homebound world has awakened many people in a visceral way to new realities and major mindset shifts. And then George Floyd. Just one in a long line of murders at the hands of the police brought the complex issues of systemic racism and inequity to a boiling point, and people to their feet and to the streets in a pandemic. Now, will this be an opportunity to change the world for good? Here to discuss how not to let this crisis go to waste, three extraordinary professionals: Kai Devereaux Lawson, Global Director of Community Engagement and Culture at WPP, and the producer and co-host of Mixed Company Podcast, do not miss that; Yadira Harrison, co-founder of Verb, a brand consultancy and experiential agency hybrid; and Kofi Amu-Gottfried, Vice President of Marketing at DoorDash. Now, by way of introduction, I've asked each of you to brag on yourselves today, in part because I think it's a best practice to celebrate each other, but also because I think it makes a bolder point that it is vital that we engineer more opportunities for breakthrough excellence in the workplace, particularly for underestimated talent out there. So Kai, I'm going to press you into service first. Please briefly tell us about your work and your point of pride.
Absolutely. So my work is currently now and has been for at least the last 4 years as a side gig to speak on behalf of the people in advertising who oftentimes feel like they don't have a voice. Ironically, that is how I catapulted into this role of community engagement. And the reality is that my job, my goal, my passion is to help people who have a passion for creativity and innovation find their footing in an industry that allows us to live out our passions while making sure that we're able to find places where we're all included and where we can all thrive. I would say the thing that I'm most proud of is that I am the same person you get here on this video today. You will find me at the grocery store, etc. So I'm just proud to be authentic, to be me, and to be helpful.
That is a very, very beautiful thing. Thank you so very much. Yadira, you're next. And thank you for giving us an opportunity to be proud of you today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. You know, for me, the work has been about 15 years on both the brand side and the agency side, respectively, with my co-founder, Shannon Jones. And, you know, for me personally, starting at Macy's Parade Entertainment Group and then working with Airbnb and eBay when I was at Civic Entertainment Group, an experiential agency. You know, Shannon and I started Verb to collaborate with client partners on what's the best way for consumers to experience their brand. And we wanted to use all the tools in our toolbox that we weren't able to do at Civic. And so going beyond just events, how can we bring in branding and digital and social and partnerships and things we had done in our previous lives. And so, you know, after about 4 years of working together, we started out and said we were going to set sail to do Verb, and started with Amazon and Nielsen and Lyft, and now I've grown that to HBO, Netflix, Everlane, Crown Magazine. And we're very proud of the work that we're doing, especially as a Black-owned agency. We feel like we get a lot of opportunities and to be part of some wonderful campaigns and to put our stamp on things by just by showing up. It's representation and it's culture that's sprinkled into every one of these campaigns that we're working on.
That is very, very wonderful. Kofi, on to you.
Hey, everyone. I'd say, you know, I'm the VP of marketing at DoorDash. Prior to that, I spent about 3.5 years at Facebook, and then most of my early career was on the agency side. So being part of this conversation is wonderful. I think in terms of what I'm proudest of, I'd have to say it's been DoorDash's response really in these moments over the past sort of 6 months, in terms of what you framed up and how we've shown up, and leaned in with our values around, how do we support restaurants in this moment during COVID, and how do we support specifically Black-owned businesses on our platform, as well as how do we show up for the Black community. So really happy to be at a company that's willing, to sort of lead with its values, even if that comes at a cost.
Oh, that is beautiful. I want to dig into some of that innovation in a moment, but before we look at how we should be moving forward, let's talk about where we've been, sort of as a benchmark. And Kai, I'm going to go back to you. You've been such an outspoken advocate for inclusion in some really creative ways as well. So before all of this happened, what was top of mind for you? What was the work as you saw it?
The work for me was very specific to my role. I had been, I quite honestly just started at WPP a few months in, and trying to define what community engagement means in a physical world where engaging with people meant to travel to them, to actually be face to face with them, and trying to figure out the way to scale that, as my role was global. So that's where my mind was. And then all of a sudden that changed because you literally cannot be face to face with people even in your own city. So that was a big shift for me.
So Kofi, same question. You are an unlikely, brilliant ad guy who is now in tech. What had been top of mind for you and tech has its own unique set of problems when it comes to inclusion and that kind of energy and spirit. What was top of mind for you before all this happened?
Yeah, I'd say it's a couple of things. I think on the inclusion point, it was really being focused on building a great diverse team that could then help in building a great business. I think whether it's been at Facebook, or now at DoorDash, I've always really tried to focus on having opportunities to build teams, because that gives you the greatest opportunity to actually like build diversity. If you take over a team that's already pretty scoped, your ability to actually shape what that ends up looking like is pretty limited. So I'd say that's what I've been most focused on. That hasn't changed. I think the other thing I was focused on was trying to figure out, just as a human, how to balance, the demands of a pretty intense job with being a father and being a great partner and being a husband. That balance, that mission, has certainly been stretched more in sort of this moment that we're in.
So Yadira, that leads me to your recent Adweek piece, which is very direct. And if you haven't read it, absolutely do. You talked, you and your co-founder talked very directly about marginalization of Black creatives and executives in agency life and what needs to happen. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that will help us bridge our way into what will it take for this moment to be different?
Yeah, that was birthed out of a little bit of resentment and anger of seeing brands and influencers and organizations and especially agencies post, the Black Square on Blackout Tuesday, and knowing people who work there, we've worked at some of these places to see that it just felt like there's a disconnect here, that they don't understand that what's happening in their own backgrounds and feeling marginalized. And, it was important for Shannon and I to speak up because, one, as Black agency owners, we have a unique position to do so without feeling a burden of repercussion or an anxiety that we're going to be taken off a project or something's going to happen. So we wanted to speak up on that, but it also wasn't about just talking about these overt or these very in-your-face racist acts. It's about microaggressions and inconsistencies and mishandling of situations and how they need to be rectified. And thinking about going beyond recruiting Black and brown faces. This is about how you treat them, how you ensure their experience is positive, creatively, emotionally, financially, and making sure that we're not othered to the point where we're wanting to leave because we're not a culture fit, which is a big thing that we always hear. So for us, it was a simple IG post that triggered something that was deeply personal that helped us in our healing of moving forward of some of the stuff that we've been dealing with in our careers. But hearing from other people, we know that that really resonated with a lot of folks.
Thanks for doing that, Yadira.
You're welcome. I'm always proud to tell my truth because no one can take that away from you. So we're really it was scary. I'm not gonna lie, it was scary for us.
Any backlash?
No, there was no backlash. We even heard from our previous agency CEO who, came with a very heartfelt, like, didn't know, thank you. And, we heard that it was a talking point for one of their town halls, which is, really great to hear. So for us, there wasn't any backlash. And I think for us that further, it made us want to continue to tell our truths and to be as honest and direct as possible, which we are just in our everyday lives. But this was a place where we felt we couldn't do that for a long time until this moment.
So I think we can concede the point that this is really a moment, that this moment is real, and the work is now making sure it's sustainable. Speaking of town halls, I don't know how many town halls I've actually attended or been invited to, and they've been tearful, and they have been real, and they've been wrenching. And so I appreciate all of the effort there. But it also seems to me that there's two things happening at once. There is the corporate response to COVID, a common enemy we could all sort of understand, and then the corporate response to systemic racism, which is a common enemy that we don't all understand. Kai, how would you grade the two?
How would I grade the two? I'd be a really tough teacher, and everybody would be getting satisfactory or less. That's that. I think
does not meet expectations.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Let's not lie here. I think the difference is empathy, right? At some point with COVID, we can all understand that it attacks any human and it can kill any human. And we've all, if we haven't seen it on TV, we've experienced it in our family and friend networks. And so therefore, I think there was a little bit more empathy that was shared, and people were a lot more sensitive to how we how we engaged with our employees internally and with our consumers externally when it came to COVID. A lot of what I saw where there were a lot of people coming together for parents, understanding that, if we're working from home all of a sudden, that there are people who are now, you are the chef, you are the doctor, you are the house cleaner, and you are still the employee of this organization, and therefore you need support. And I think that was great to see. However, on the contrast, because everyone either doesn't understand much about the Black experience because you haven't experienced it for yourself, or you haven't to this point done a lot of research to get some sort of external understanding of what that is. It seemed and it felt, to your point, with all of those town halls, it felt painful to kind of work through emotionally and physically. I think we prepped yesterday, and Yadira, you mentioned 6 weeks of being tired, of trying to figure it out. And I guess I would say, like, it's been very rough. We don't have answers, and that's what makes this time very interesting, to say the very least.
And everyone mentions hiring strategies. I feel like if we were living in a world where we could move around, there'd be a run at HBCUs right now. What is going to make the changes that we need to see in terms of the workforce authentic and real and lasting? The welcoming that Yadira was talking about. What do we need to see that will make it stick? Kofi, you've got a big team. Why don't we go to you? And you've been building diverse teams very intentionally. What have you learned from that process?
Yeah, I think for me, the thing that matters, and I've seen this in every organization that I've worked in, far too often the work of diversity is left to like the diversity team. The reality is that like those teams are actually quite small. Those teams do not hire anyone. They're charged with sort of influencing large organizations, but the people who can actually make the difference are the hiring managers. So for me, the thing that actually works for me is anyone on my team who's hiring knows fully well that I am not going to approve the hire unless they can show me evidence that they've interviewed a diverse slate of candidates, that there's at least 2 underrepresented minorities or women in the final round of 5 candidates that we're bringing on site. And they know that they're going to be gold on that. As a company at DoorDash, we're actually building a diversity accountability mechanism that's basically going to say, if you do not build diverse teams over time, that will affect how you're compensated. And this is the thing that I think not enough companies have done. So it makes it easy to pay lip service to the thing, but no one's actually accountable for it. And so for me, that's been the most important thing on my own teams, and then now seeing it at a broader level at the company and that.
And I want to just jump in on that, because I also think, Kofi, you make a good point of sometimes just by having people of color in executive positions, I know for myself at my previous agency, I had the most diverse team that I'd hired and staffed up. Why? Because I'm looking at it from a very different point of view. And I'm not looking at somebody's background, that it has to be this school, these particular qualifications, because I know that for myself, we're able to do so much with so little. And so for me, it's like, can you do it? Do you want to do it? Do you have the passion and the drive? So I'm thinking about it in a very different way than some of my counterparts would, just by being who I am. So to me, having leadership that looks different also just brings a very different mindset to the hiring.
That's right.
One of the things that we talked about in our prep call was commercializing Black pain, which was such a powerful way of framing what we're seeing now everywhere. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and what that looks like? And also on the flip side, is there a role for marketing and messaging for this movement? What would be helpful? What would be authentic? What should we be looking for? Kai, you want to take a crack at that first?
Yeah, so I'll say that I'll start with this latter point to affirm, yes, there definitely is a place for marketing and messaging in this point in time, in this movement. I think what was meant, or what I meant by the commercialization of Black pain was, in the midst of seeing Black bodies once again murdered on our televisions, iPhones, Androids, computer screens, any screen you have, etc. It felt like there were a lot of brands using that as an opportunity to, instead of leaning into how can I be of service to you if you are in pain in this moment, using that as an opportunity to say, hey, just in case you wanted to know, I'm anti-racist, so you can still shop with me. And that came to fruition in the practice of putting up Black squares, and the practice of publicly releasing your internal memos. And it just didn't feel right. It felt very inauthentic, and it felt like you were doing it for yourself, very self-serving.
Everyone's nodding. Anybody else? Yadira, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I know for myself, I'm very concerned about it. I had a past colleague ask, is this something that we should be talking about and thinking about at our agency? And I was like, yes. And we should be thinking about it the same way that we think about pride, or we think about, talking to women, or all the different months and things that we have. And it shouldn't be this one moment, but it definitely should be from a place of authenticity. And you should be working with the people that are, and amplifying the voices and people who are in this particular space, or who do this work, so that you're not coming from it from a place of talking at us, but you're talking, you're part of the conversation with us. So for me, I know the first thing that I thought about was Juneteenth. That was, and you start to hear that. And I'm from Texas, and, I remember talking about Juneteenth years and years ago to my, relatives in the North were like, that's crazy. What are you doing? And now to see that it is on some level becoming commercialized, and, I don't want it to lose its meaning and the celebration that goes with it. But to me, that was one of the first signs of like, oh no, is this what this now means if we are going to commercialize Black pain? And now this is going to be something that, you're going to have a Juneteenth sale, or you're going to have, it's just like, where is this going to go?
Right. Which brings us back to,
sorry, I was just going to add one brief point. I think the line is, are you doing this to amplify the voices of the people who need this moment, who need to be celebrated in this moment, or are you doing this to self-serve a marketing need that you have? And I think that needs to be considered when developing these briefs for these Black campaigns.
Yeah, we just said really simply, like, this is not a brief. Like, you cannot approach this exercise the way that you do anything else, and don't do anything if it can't be authentic. Don't do anything if it can't be long-term. There's a lot of like really in the moment of like, we're discounting X thing for 1 week, and you're like, to solve systemic racism, like, I guess better than like putting up a post, but like, that's not really gonna be the answer. So like, what's your commitment going to look like in a real way,
Right.
over the long term, and really pushing for those types of solutions versus the sort of ephemeral, we want to be part of this conversation right now.
Which brings me back to innovation. So Kofi, why don't you walk us through a little bit about how you were able to create new products and services, or just a new way of dealing with the restaurants, with Black-owned businesses who were in desperate trouble?
Yeah, so I think we started before the sort of George Floyd's murder. We had done a lot of work in the restaurant space because, as everyone knows, restaurants are probably one of the most brutally affected business verticals by sort of COVID and everything that's happened. And so we went ahead and did a bunch of programs, but the most notable for them is that we cut all of their commissions by 50%. And so what that actually meant is, like, we ended up saving restaurants over $120 million since March, which for us is like a significant sort of top line opportunity to give up. And then I think what we then did, once we really started grappling with sort of George Floyd's murder, what that meant for Black businesses, how do we think about what else we would do for them? Because a lot of these Black businesses had already benefited from the first round of sort of COVID relief work that we had done. But then we said, we actually need to put a lens, not just on any small business, which is what we had done, but we need to put a lens on this community. So what does that need to look like? And for us, that meant, elevating them and making them more discoverable. So we then went and literally got all the Black businesses on our platform to opt in to being featured, so we could, pull them up in a carousel saying, hey, here's how you can support your Black-owned business. We provided sort of $0 delivery fees through the end of the year to drive demand to them, to again give people a reason to order from those places. But I think that the thing that I'm probably proudest of is that we then went and built a partnership with Kiva to create a loan facility. Because again, we know that in these businesses historically have had very difficult sort of opportunities to get access to capital. So we are now matching a revolving loan fund with Kiva that these businesses can apply to, especially as we start to come out of this, and whenever that may be, to think about how do you get these businesses back on their feet. But we're also now providing capital. So I think for us, we've tried to think about what are the ways that we can engage in this community, what are the key problems that we believe our platform and our products can solve, and lean into those.
So that is beautiful. I didn't know about the Kiva partnership. That's brilliant. So when we recreate this panel next year, hopefully in person, what other things will we need to have seen for us to be able to say, yes, this is real, people are doing this work? What kinds of things, even if they're real world examples, shout them out, or just the things that you're looking for that should be on our radar screen too? Yadira, can I go to you first?
Yeah, as hopeful as I am, I'm an Afro-Latino woman in America, in the world of advertising and marketing, that knows attention spans are short. And so for me, even if the industry is still talking about this with the same intensity and scrutiny and humility that we are now, and coming up with true action plans that they're acting on, I will believe that this is real and things are changing. I feel, as I don't want to be a cynic, but for me, I'm like, we have an important election this year. Like, there's so much other moments that are coming up that I don't want this conversation to get lost and to feel that we didn't make any real strides. Like, this was a black square. I released my executive board numbers, and then we can move on from here without doing anything. So for me, it's about when we're not necessarily talking about symptoms and we really are looking at some of those real changes to that actual system, especially in the agency and marketing world.
Kai, what do you think?
I would jump in and add to that, because I think the way we are approaching business and people as an industry right now is what I think is necessary to sustain that momentum and to create actual change. So for me, that means instead of just preaching about agile functions and holding ourselves accountable, it's putting that into practice, which means we now have to revisit every few weeks how we look at hiring. Is it still necessary to worry about geographical barriers when it comes to hiring? What does creativity look like when you're not necessarily sitting at the same tables to build that. One of the things that has happened inside of WPP that I'm super proud of is, kind of taking the creative resourcing approach to looking at our existing workforce, and where there may no longer be a need or in one area, in one brand, how can we redeploy that person to work somewhere else so that we're not losing talent?
Right.
And that also removes geographical boundaries. When we're looking at culture, what does that look like? If culture changes, before we would say the technology changes every 6 months, well, it feels like culture is changing every 5 days at this point. And that means that we have to be more in tune, not just with ourselves and how we feel about that culture, but actually what's happening politically, creatively, economically, and of course, racially, and what that means in the global sense. So I think it's going to be a lot of iteration, and I don't think we need to be afraid of failure in that sense, but I do think that there needs to be a try. We need to apply the same amount of creativity to talent as we do to our briefs, and to hold ourselves accountable, not necessarily call people out, but to hold people to the fire. If you said you were going to do something, 6 months from now, I'm going to follow up with you to make sure that you've done it, or to see how you've pivoted.
Mm-hmm. That is a lot of nodding here. That reminds me, I think I want to do a story for Fortune on brief best practices post-COVID, because that, you just opened up a whole new world for me.
As a previous project manager, that was always my thing. How do we get our brief to be the most succinct and to be basically the heart of the work that we're doing?
Right. All the fluff, all the inauthenticity is out of it. Kofi, you're nodding too. What we get together this time next year, what will you need to see in the world to believe this is all real?
I don't, like, my thing is, like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. I don't want other people to talk about it. Not interested in like a panel. Like, I think, like, we show up next year and it's like, just bring receipts. Everybody turn up.
Bring receipts.
That's right.
Yes,
that's right. That's right.
Receipts.
We'll just share recipes at that point. We'll just be joyous.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
the work.
Let's just learn from what everyone has done and like what's worked and what hasn't, and like let's actually have a conversation about progress. Because and I think Yadira said this. Like, I think the thing that's been really interesting in looking at like different brands or leaders is, like, for me, everything comes back to, like, is the thing that you're promising, is there actually skin in the game, right? And so you look at you said shout out companies. You look at Netflix and they go, we're moving 2% of our cash to Black-owned banks. You go, yep, that's skin in the game. Like, you're actually doing something, which is material. It's not just a donation, it's systemic, because that's a change that's going to pay dividends over time. And everyone is like making fun of Aunt Jemima, but like that, that's like, they actually, it's going to cost them.
Yeah, that's right.
It'll cost them a lot to actually figure out what that new thing is. And so, like, while we might be like, oh, you just figure this out, turns out they've actually put more skin in the game than most brands that are actually speaking about these things. So for me, it's looking back and looking at systems, looking at what systems changed, looking at like actual initiatives, and like if we can share and learn. That's where I want to be next time we're talking about this.
That's where I want to be too. And we are up against time. I just want to thank the three of you for organizing this and for including me and for teaching me and teaching the world and doing the work. And I promise you, when we get back together this time next year, we're going to have receipts, recipes, and joy to share. Thank you, Kai. Thank you, Kofi. Thank you, Yadira.
Thank you.
And thank you, 3%.